So my name is Howard Yates, and I will be joined by my colleague Deb Lee to talk about this topic. My background is very much in the planning and business modeling side of Anaplan, where I've been working for over 5 years in developing forecasting applications and many other things within Anaplan. So this is the agenda for today. We will be starting with a look at why we've chosen this topic as one of interest to discuss in this session. And then we will do that by expanding into alternative approaches that you can be currently using or considering using for this kind of forecasting use case, and appraising those and their strengths and weaknesses to really bring out what it is that makes PlanIQ interesting. Then we'll move on to PlanIQ itself and look at the interface that gets presented to the user, and also the components behind the scenes that the user is driving to get a good sense of what's really going on. And then we'll move to some examples of where you could apply PlanIQ to get some value out of it. And then we'll conclude and summarize at the end. So the context is that investment in AI and ML activity is really starting to ramp up. The IDC has recently estimated that the spending growth of AI is running at 24.5% and will set to continue at this rate right through to 2025. And that's when it's already at a staggering $85 billion. So it will reach a staggering $204 billion by 2025. So already people are acting and spending lots of money on it. However, on the right-hand side, if you look at a recent paper from MIT Sloan School, they've identified that while 71% of respondents to their survey are able to report that the business value associated with AI is readily identifiable, a staggering only 11% say that they are realizing significant benefits out of AI. So a big gap there, one that everyone is wanting to close, I'm sure. Finally, just a quote from Andrew Ng, who is a Stanford professor, founder of Google Brain and a number of other things, perceived as a real expert and guru in the area of AI. He's very pro the use of AI technologies, as you might imagine, and is really suggesting people should just jump in and start using this. And well, he might, because so much of the technology that we have is capable of handling the data, which is at an all-time record in terms of its availability. So never has there been a better time to combine those two to get some value out of AI. But perhaps those who haven't got Andrew Ng's capabilities are thinking, are we a bit more concerned about realizing the value from using this kind of technology? So why was PlanIQ of interest to us? Well, as I said, I've been working with Anaplan and particularly the area of forecasting for many years and quite familiar with the different techniques. We also at Thorogood work with a variety of machine learning technologies, those listed on the right-hand side for you there. And it seems like a natural area of interest as it overlaps both. But PlanIQ, rather than simply duplicative, has something really new to offer. It's got a unique combination of both of these different types of approach. So in short, there is accuracy, because at the end of the day, it is using the very same powerful machine learning algorithms that the big cloud players are offering. But in addition to that, you're getting a much stronger focus on the actual forecasting activity for the business user, the much quicker feedback loop. Business user is insulated from many of the technical challenges, such as ETL and writing Python, etc. And also, there's no real need for extensive data science. There is data science to get into, but you don't need to know any, particularly to get started. You can, for instance, set the system up to choose the algorithm for you that it fits best, but you can be more sophisticated. So there is an opportunity to develop within the tool itself. And scalability. So this is beyond the spreadsheet world, the desktop. May not be the absolute peak of scalability, but there is lots of scalability here for using enterprise level data to generate forecasts. So let's look at some of the alternative approaches just to give us some context. Before we do that, we look at the variety of approaches to data science and indeed analytics by analyzing them across a spectrum. And that spectrum starts with the very simple, the left-hand side, the transaction data, where everything's all too easy and straightforward, right through to the far side, where it's almost like the opposite. It's opaque, difficult to understand. You need specialist skills. It also takes an awful lot of computational horsepower to generate results. And then there is everything in between. But all of these systems require the ability to get good quality data in at the outset. That with data engineering, where both addresses data structure and the data itself. And then the results of our work need to be displayed in intuitive fashions in data visualization. So just mapping the time series forecasting process onto this continuum, we have basic forecasting on the left-hand side, which really amounts to, this is what happened in the last period. Let's use our judgment and knowledge of the situation to come up with a new forecast. We can be more sophisticated than that and use some statistical support for our forecast. And I'm going to embellish that in a second. So this is where we provide some extra context for a disaggregation of the information in the recent past to help us make a better forecast. On the right-hand side, we can use bespoke algorithms and solutions within the cloud provider platforms to come up with highly tailored solutions to specific business problems. Now, PlanIQ sits in between these because on one hand, it allows the business user to do an curation of the source data and the explanatory data that supports and has causal links to the variables that we are looking to predict. And at the same time, it is going to use the same algorithms that we have in the bespoke solutions on the right-hand side. So let's first look at the left-hand side a bit more closely before I hand over to Deb to discuss the right-hand side a bit more. So a typical approach you might see within Anaplan might be described as a trend and profile decomposition. So we start with past historical data, which go back 2 years, 3 years more. And it will have a trend, might have a discernible profile. Here we've got a really obvious trend and profile. It's much less likely to be like this. But the aim is to then go and create our new forecast for the year. And to address it, what we do is we take that trend and fit a line to it. So the line that fits best could be done using a statistical technique or simply by judgment. And then by default, we might just extend it forward. We could alter that trend if we have some extra information about the company or a circumstance that we're trying to forecast. So using the explanatory information, such as changing business conditions, to inform a human intervention in the forecast, an uplift or reduce the trend line. We also want to look at the annual profile. So here we've just put on the 2019 profile, and we can also overlay that with the 2020 profile, and we start to see a kind of general pattern. So we could use a statistical technique to average this, We could put some weighting on it to favor the more recent profile information over the old. Anyway, we want to come up with our anticipated profile. By having an annual profile and a trend, it's easy just to go and create a combination of the two and form our new forecast that way. So this technique has a number of advantages, but it does have some downsides. So let's look at those. So it's very easy to understand and discuss with others. It allows you to build in the human judgment as well as provide a context of actuals in which that judgment can sit, and you can add your actuals as we move through time, and we can refer to whether we've got the trend right or the annual profile wrong, or vice versa. So it gives us a basis around which we can have an iterative discussion to understand how we forecast yet better. Downsides are of it that really, to get a good forecast, you want to be doing this sort of activity at scale. So breaking your top level forecast down in some way, by customer, by product, by time, by geography, etc., so that you can get that improved accuracy. And also understand, once time passes, where you were correct and where you weren't in your estimates. But doing that introduces a number of challenges. It increases the amount of human interactivity that you have into each individual forecast. You're going to have to start using default approaches. So keep the trend line just naturally extended unless there is human intervention, etc., so that you can actually get around all the different data points that you need to be forecasting. Still, a very popular approach and allows for a reasonable amount of success. Now I'm going to hand over to Deb to talk about the ML side of things.
So if we think about the analytics continuum that Howard was just speaking to, I think it's important, before we jump into some of the considerations for adopting that type of approach, to just cover what actually needs to go into creating and supporting those types of systems. This is really even just stepping back from the technologies that you're using. This is really just what's required to get these up and running. So you typically would start off by making sure that you've defined the business value and maybe any existing baselines. So if there are maybe existing forecasts that are being done in, a manual or ad hoc way where we're looking to really improve the accuracy and make them more automated, that's something where we'd say, okay, let's now define what a POC to prove out, the advanced capabilities could look like. You'll then move into the actual experimentation. So you'll need to do a bit of data engineering. You'll be doing quite a bit of iterating around your features, which variables are most important, doing sort of statistical analysis on those, tuning your hyperparameters, training different types of models. So maybe testing out different frameworks and libraries, different types of packages, and then evaluating the metrics from those. So what does our accuracy, our loss look like over time? And then eventually, hopefully, if your experiment is successful, but we know not all experiments are successful, you'll end up with something that you're ready to sort of take to your end users and put it in a production system so that they can consume it and use it. Or maybe it's used by downstream applications in other ways, which I'll get to in a minute. You need to think about how you actually productionize it. So you need to have automated data pipelines, automated ML pipelines. Do you have all the proper endpoints defined that you need for various different types of model serving scenarios? Do you have unit tests in place so that if something breaks, you can easily detect where it broke? And you might need to do a bit of refactoring and scaling to get it to be production ready. And then eventually you'll move it into a state where it can be continuously serving the outputs from the model, as well as you'll want to keep monitoring it to make sure that your model quality isn't drifting or decaying over time. What we saw a lot of during some of the initial lockdowns was that a lot of historical forecasts that had been sort of quite stable prior to that point were their accuracy started just really, really tanking, when the supply chain was disrupted over the course of, items not getting delivered to places, manufacturing plants shutting down. So you also need to make sure that in this loop, you're able to quickly move from 4 back to 1 in case there are new changes introduced that need to be addressed. And so how can this work with Anaplan, right? And if you have a need, you've identified the fact that you want to create a more bespoke or customized solution, I think there are some key considerations to keep in mind. And then I'll also speak to how it can work with Anaplan as well. I think some of these are not necessarily just specific to a custom AI or ML production solution, but I think keep in mind sort of on the left-hand side, if you are choosing to go down this route, make sure you're thinking about how much customization is actually required. So are we using a package that has types of parameters around seasonality or change points that need quite a bit of tuning, right? That's going to take time. And how well can what you're building integrate with other tools? And are you interested in something that enables like multi-cloud flexibility? Because that could influence the route that you go down. And sort of how supportable is it? So I'd mentioned things like unit tests, but also sort of automation, I think, can feed into that, as well as do you have a support system in place to make sure that you can always keep the lights on for whatever you're building, because the more complex it is, the more effort it's going to be to support over time. Maybe you have to manage the infrastructure, right? And do you have the appropriate skills? So the farther you move along that spectrum, on the analytics spectrum, so the more skills will be required from not just a data science perspective, but also from an ML ops sort of engineering perspective to maintain these types of models over time and ensure that they don't decay. And as always, I think as you start to introduce more hops, right? So you can see on the right-hand side, model outputs feeding into Anaplan. Where is your data being stored? Where are the various locations? You need to start thinking about all those different points. And then obviously the complexity of your actual use case itself. So I think this is pretty important before you actually maybe get started, is just to do a bit of evaluation to say, do we really need neural networks for this type of forecasting use case? And I think that will also feed back into how much customization, right? How does it integrate? And then to Howard's point earlier, the more sort of complex or the more models you're creating are going to have infrastructure costs associated with them. So if you have a model and you think, I'm going to train it on all of my historical data over time from the past 7 years, but it takes 20 hours to train and run, you are going to start to very quickly incur pretty high infrastructure costs over time as that continues to run. So just to give a bit of a view of how, we would see these types of solutions fitting in with Anaplan, you would need to have some kind of experimentation environment. So whether that's contained within one cloud provider, maybe using more open source tools hosted on one of them, but either way, you need that sandbox to make sure that you have the appropriate tools needed to actually build and test this model. Once you're happy with it, you need to make sure that you're landing the outputs that are going to be consumed and used in Anaplan in a location where Anaplan can pull them in and use either sort of the Anaplan connector or CloudWorks could be another option to consider. And then finally, once you have that data ingested in, you'll probably want to sort of combine it maybe with some of your other planning modules. So making sure that you have the data structured and that your dimensions are properly set up for use. You potentially want to do some scenario analysis. And then oftentimes in many instances, this type of model output could also be key to some of the workflows also that are being done in the tool. So submissions or sign-offs or anything like that. So I'll now hand it back to Howard, who's going to talk to us a bit more around PlanIQ.
A very different set of considerations there when you think about a bespoke solution integrating with Anaplan. So yes, let's look at PlanIQ itself. So first off is to say that all of its technology components are there in the cloud. The only thing that might not be is where your data happens to reside. That may or may not be in the cloud. But as you already face, there is the need to get your data into Anaplan, for which you can use conventional methods. And once your data is there, Anaplan passes it to AWS via CloudWorks. So CloudWorks is really facilitating that transfer process. So once arrived at AWS, your forecast will run anything between tens of minutes to hours, depending on all the details therein. And once done, the result will be automatically passed back, again via CloudWorks, back to Anaplan so that it can be reviewed. So looking at Anaplan itself, so within it, you will need to create a number of cubes to work with PlanIQ. And these address these areas as marked. So a cube for your historical data, that could go back many years, and you need to flag the variable within the historical data that is the one you are looking to forecast. That is the minimum requirement. You don't need the other data elements that I'm going to get onto. So you don't need related data, you don't need attributes, but the more data that you have, likely the better will be the forecast result. So the related data could also be thought of the explanatory data. So this is data that has some kind of causal relationship with the data that you're trying to predict. For instance, that good weather will drive ice cream sales, for example. Now, attribute data is similar, but it is different. This is more describing the types of data that you have, the metadata. So it could be the products, the customers, for example, it could be the pack size, the color, who the intended type of customer was, etc. So it's all things that really augment the types of categorical information that are used in the historical data. And then we need a forecast cube that is going to receive the data back from AWS. Now, the system will already contains holiday calendars so that you can benefit from changing calendars year on year, such as Easter being late one year, because events like that are also effectively related data for your forecast. There are a few Anaplan technical things to build. You have to build import actions and export actions so that the system knows how to import and export the data in and out as per the green arrows on the left-hand side. So let's look at the interface. A few screens here. For example, this is one of the early screens that shows you that the system is fundamentally I don't know if a wizard is perhaps understating it, but it's a nice, easy, intuitive interface that you just follow a series of steps to get your data in and get your forecast created. So here you've been invited to set up a data collection routine. Equally, you've got options to create the forecast model and a forecast action, which is more to determine the actual timing of when forecasts are going to be run. So for instance, if you have actual data that gets loaded into Anaplan on a regular cadence, then you can get a forecast to run automatically following that. So once into your data collection, you get screens like this, which just allow you to go and click on boxes, select the objects that you've created, and a few other configurations like your time scale, how granular you want your forecast to be, and things like what it is you actually want to predict. If you've got a time dimension that is not the Anaplan time dimension, you can select that, for example. All nice and easy for the business user to work with. And then when you get your forecast back from AWS, you'll be told about that. And you can access various different pieces of information about it. When it was run, what algorithm did it use? Here we've got the auto ML algorithm from Anaplan, which allows it to make choices about what the best fitting algorithm is going to be. So you don't need to worry about choice at all. It will decide which one it's had the best results for, so that you don't need to worry about that. And another more advanced pieces of information are also available, such as forecast accuracy, which you can get into. You can grow more into the data science side of things. You can set it to specific algorithms so that you can tuning, creating lots of different parallel forecasts to compare one against the other, etc. Use different explanatory data to see which has the most profound use. So this is all business activity, getting a better quality of forecast and understanding your data a lot more clearly. So let's move now to some examples of where a time series forecast can be run with PlanIQ. So this is about realizing that value, translating your understanding into something that's tangible. So one good example is forecasting cash receipts. So you can look at that process and break it down into a series of stages. So first of all, you've got to create a demand that the customer has in mind for your product, which is a task in its own right. Next, you need to understand how demand translates into orders. So there's a number of factors there, some of which may be seasonal, to do with stock levels that a customer may maintain, all kinds of the types of product that get ordered, for example. Then in getting from the order stage to the invoice, we need to think about, is this an item that likely have in stock, or is it one we're going to manufacture when the order comes in? Where is the customer located? What's the delivery like, etc.? How do we invoice? And then once the customer has received the invoice, what is the payment profile for the customer? So lots of different patterns and characteristics in a multi-stage process. They're difficult if you break it down. But if you apply an ML approach right from start to finish, then you can build all those wrinkles and idiosyncrasies and patterns that a machine is very good at identifying and getting to the bottom of and coming up with a prediction for. Now, let me pass you back to Deb, who's going to pick up on a few more heavy ML type scenarios.
I think it's also worth calling out a few sort of variety of different types of use cases that we think would be useful. So the first one here that I've called out is around actually promo planning and thinking about the value to companies in terms of the massive investments that they make every year with sort of their retailers to really try to get the best deal that they can and also drive demand using promotion tactics. So if you think about what a promo planner is doing, they're going to really need to understand, based off of a variety of factors that they can control, what's going to give them the optimal uplift on a promo. So you potentially be training a lot of different models across maybe different levels of the hierarchy, because not every promotion is run across the same sort of level or grouping of products, which could be handled by PlanIQ. And then you really need to be able to capture assumptions. So how much am I assuming cannibalization is going to impact? How much, how long do I think I want to run this promo? And how much of a discount do I want to give? So Anaplan is very well placed to capture those types of assumptions to then be incorporated in your analysis to see what should my optimal promo look like. And then oftentimes these types of plans really need some sort of workflow associated with them. So I've done a bit of tuning and iterating on it. I'm happy with it now. And then you need to submit your final promo plan, let's say for the next 6 months at least. And then maybe it needs to also be signed off by an approver. So you could do all of that within the Anaplan workspace. And it's going to be inherently time series in nature, as promotions are always going to be running for very specific durations of time where they're going to be impacting. So you need to be thinking across your supply chain, right? So how does that impact in terms of your shipments? what does the customer experience look like? What has it looked like in the past? What can we glean from various panel data sets around shopper behavior? Maybe what did our historical promotion plans look like in this space? And then any maybe external factors as well from a data perspective. So maybe you want to include the weekly economic index or the inflation, GDP, et cetera. And I think the key here is that using for this type of use case in PlanIQ with Anaplan is that your promo planners can input assumptions to be included. They can see that impact on the demand for their forecast, continue to tune and refine and change those, and then finally submit it. So I think it's a pretty good case in that sense. There are a few others that I think are also worth touching on. So demand management, you in many instances may be interested to really improve the accuracy. So I had mentioned before, oftentimes we see teams doing these types of demand forecasts across many Excel files, right? So PlanIQ would provide a great use to help not just sort of automate and make that process easier so you're not managing sort of as much from a local file perspective, but also to improve your accuracy using ML financial planning. So Howard has touched on, cash flow, but also maybe PlanIQ could really help you in terms of generating your OpEx forecasts, which then help you make decisions more quickly around spending. And then commercial revenue planning. So this has a bit of overlap with the promotional planning use case I just discussed, but thinking about improving that ROI, maximizing profit, and really getting a sense of which drivers are going to be most impactful on your forecast. And then the last one here is really around workforce planning. So across HR groups, we do see that there's a keen interest to reduce costs and then really try to find the right level of planning for both staffing and skills and being able to sort of predict based off of what we knew in the past and maybe capturing some key assumptions and seasonality. So I think all of these would be good use cases to consider if you're thinking about some sort of implementation for forecasting using Anaplan. So I'm going to conclude a bit here and then go through some next steps as well. So I think what's key to keep in mind, regardless of the type of approach that you're considering, is that make sure that you're taking into account your business requirements, the skills that you have on hand, and your capacity to execute on those, and then the technologies that you're interested in using when you're looking across the different types of approaches for these products. PlanIQ is going to allow you to pretty quickly start using some powerful ML algorithms for time series use cases. So things like profit, ARIMA, et cetera, without really needing to do much in terms of managing the infrastructure or even like the data engineering pipelines or having to automate those pipelines yourself to generate a forecast. So it can really help you keep a focus on the key business requirements and making sure that business users are getting the most value out of it. And it's going to also give you the capability to scale the number of models and sort of that using that compute power with Amazon sitting behind it. So it's going to be a lot more powerful than trying to do something like this in your local Excel, let's say. So if you are interested in sort of getting started, we thought it would be useful to lay out some potential next steps or ideas. Obviously, just email us if you are interested in having a conversation. But I think where we typically see customers really able to jump in and get started is around identifying, what would maybe be a good use case to do a POC, so proof of concept, or create an MVP, minimum viable product, to really start to quickly see the value of this before jumping right into a large scale enterprise application build. And I think another sort of the low-hanging fruit for a lot of times is maybe there are existing use cases around your organization. So, demand forecasting that's being done in Excel those are going to be really good candidates for a migration to an Anaplan forecasting use case. So maybe looking for some of those to get started with. And then I think trialing the tool itself could also provide a lot of value to see if do our users like this is something that they would like. And then the final point here is for all of these things, I think not even just Anaplan and not even just building models, but generally for any sort of data application, your data quality is going to determine how successful you will be. So you could be using a world-class algorithm or a world-class planning and business modeling tool, But if you haven't really addressed your issues in data quality, it's going to be quite challenging to really deliver anything that's valuable. So I would always keep that in mind. And if you're curious really about anything with respect to Anaplan or PlanIQ, pricing, access, training, enablement programs, just reach out to one of us. So you should have our contact info. And then just a bit about Thorogood here. So we are an independent specialist consultancy, and we really play in the data and analytics space. We have offices all over the world: London, Philly, Boston, Singapore, Sao Paulo, Bangalore, and the types of services that we provide really range from anywhere doing strategy, so helping organizations figure out, how do we do analytics, to the build, right? So the delivery side of things, and sort of training, driving user adoption, change management, and also maintaining and supporting those applications after they are built. We work with a lot of technologies. Howard had touched on a couple earlier, but it's always worth mentioning that we are technology agnostic. So we partner with sort of all of the leaders in the data and AI space. And that's all we have for today. Thank you very much.